Jesus was out on the Sea of Galilee with the apostles. And during the night, they were caught in a severe storm. Matter of fact, the disciples, who were seasoned fishermen, they thought they were going to sink. And in the middle of the storm, they saw the lightning flash, and it exposed that Jesus was asleep in the boat during the storm. And they woke him up, and they asked the dumbest question in the Bible. They said, "Jesus, do you not care that we're perishing?" Of course, God so loved the world, he sent his son so that we don't have to perish. And Jesus woke up, and he looked around, and he spoke one word in Hebrew. It's shalom. In Greek, he says, "Peace be still." And as soon as he spoke, the water was completely flat. It became glassy calm. The clouds parted, starry moonlit night, and the storm was over. Perfect calm. Now, the disciples were scared before they woke Jesus up. After Jesus calmed the storm, they were really scared. That's what it says. Now they were exceedingly afraid. And they thought, "Who is this, and what manner of man that even the wind and the waves obey him?" Well, now they can't use the sail. There's no wind. So Jesus directs them for some strange reason. They rowed to the southeastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, which is a deserted area outside of Decapolis. And there's a cemetery. Up on the steep hill, they see these caves and tombs, a pagan cemetery. And as it's just starting to get daylight, it's kind of creepy. It's that early twilight where you can see the shadow of the eastern sky. And they pull the boat up on the shore, and some of the disciples get out. Maybe they're looking for firewood to build a fire and dry themselves off. I don't know. And all of a sudden, they hear this horrible shriek. And they all jump about 3 feet off the ground because their nerves are already rattled. And out from one of the tombs, this creature comes charging down the hill towards them. Looks like it's part man and part Yeti, abominable snowman or Bigfoot or something. Long, dirty, matted hair. He's got chains hanging off his wrists and his ankles, and his eyes are glaring, and his teeth are gnashing, and he's foaming at the mouth, has no clothes on. His body is covered with scars and cuts, and he comes rampaging down the hill towards them. What do you think the disciples said? "Oh, good. We can talk to him about Jesus." I don't think they were thinking about giving out Bible tracts or witnessing. They were thinking about life preservation, and they probably went charging back to the boat and pushed it off in the water with a wake and went rowing off as fast as they could. And then when they got about 100 yards from shore, they did a head count and realized Jesus was not with them. There's supposed to be 13 in the boat. There were only 12. And so if you saw a character like this come charging down the hill towards you, you'd probably run the other direction. But Jesus did not run. And they turned and saw that man fall at Jesus' feet in a posture of worship. And the reason that Jesus did not run is because he's not afraid of the devil. And by the way, if you've got Christ in you, you don't have to be afraid either. Because the Bible says, "He that is in you is greater than he that is in the world." Jesus said, "What is your name?" He said, "Legion," because many devils had entered into him. A Roman legion could have thousands of soldiers. And so this man is so thoroughly gone that he's filled with devils. Now, you've heard of a person being possessed by a devil. Maybe you read in the Bible where it says Mary Magdalene, Jesus cast 7 devils out of Mary. I'd hate to run into somebody with 7 devils. You probably all run into people with devils, you just don't know it. Once you get to thousands, it's hard to hide, as is true with this man's case. This man is exhibit A of a perfectly lost person. You cannot be any more lost. You think about it, in the mind of a Jew, if you were near the dead or touching the dead, you're unclean. The man was cutting himself. He had blood and scars. Blood was unclean. You read on in the story, and there's a herd of pigs grazing on the hill above him. Pigs are unclean. He's naked. He's covered with chains. He's self-destructive. This man is lost. Jesus did not run. Jesus is exhibit A of God's plan for man. Now, on the shore that day, you see God's plan for your life. Do you all know God has a plan for your life? Let me tell you real quick. I don't know all the details, but I'll tell you one thing I know about God's plan for your life. A Christian is a follower of Christ to be Christ-like. It's Jesus' plan for you to be like his son. If you follow Jesus, you become like him. You know what they said about the apostles? They could tell that they'd been with Jesus because they acted like Jesus. How many of you realize you believe God has a plan for your life? There's a plan. There's a purpose for your life. Hopefully you know what that is. Do you know the devil has a plan for your life? Exhibit A of the devil's plan for your life is this man. Of course, this is a G-rated version of the man because the Bible said he was naked. The devil's plan for your life is to erase the image of God. The man was always in the mountains, in the tombs, crying. Everything in this story is symbolic of what it means to be lost. Just think about it for a second. Who typically lives in tombs? Dead people. That's a trick question. Do dead people live in tombs? But you know what I mean. Who do you usually find in tombs? Dead people, right? What does death represent in the Bible? He that has the Son has life. He that has not the Son has not life. Jesus said, I've come that you might have life. And if we don't have life, we're spiritually dead. Jesus, one time someone said, Lord, I want to follow you, but first I've got to bury my father. And Jesus said, let the dead bury the dead. I thought, what does that mean when I first read it? I tried to conjure up images of zombies conducting funerals, the dead burying the dead. What does that mean? But Christ is saying those that don't know him are spiritually dead. What else do you learn about this man? What is he wearing? He's not wearing anything. And he doesn't care. After Adam and Eve encountered the serpent in the Garden of Eden, you know, Adam and Eve, when it says they were naked, it's really, they were clothed with these invisible robes of light. When Moses talked to God, it says he glowed. And Adam and Eve talking to God before sin, they glowed. And after they sinned, the light went out and they saw their nakedness. The devil wants to strip us. He wants to shame us. People without Christ live in shame and guilt. That's what the devil wants to do. You can read about the man in the parable of the Good Samaritan. This man falls among thieves, and the thieves beat him, and they rob him, and they strip him. You can read in the Bible about Acts chapter 16. These 7 boys tried to cast the devil out of a man. They didn't know Jesus, but they heard that Paul was doing it. And they said, in the name of Jesus, who Paul preaches. And the devil said to them, this demon-possessed man, who had this supernatural strength, he said, I know Jesus and I know Paul. I don't know you. And he jumped on these 7 young men and he beat them up and wounded them, and they fled, wounded and naked. The devil wants to strip people and shame them. Something else he is wearing, he's got chains. Chains in the Bible are a symbol of bondage. The Bible says we are holden by the cords of our sin. I've got a theory. My theory is God designed us to all be addicts. Follow me. And it's an ugly word, but follow me. We're designed to be totally in love with God and preoccupied with God and consumed by an attraction for God. If God is not at the middle of your life, you will fill that vacuum with something else. If you don't have God in the middle of your life, you are some kind of an addict. Some of you might think, well, Pastor Doug, I use no drugs or alcohol. Well, the question is, what is your addiction? If it's not God, well, it's something. It might be money. Some people are workaholics. We kind of praise them. Some people are addicted to shopping. Some people earn it, the others spend it. It can be both kind of addicts. Some people hoard things. It's a different kind of addiction. Some people are addicted to passion and sex. All different kinds of addictions out there. And if Christ is not the middle of your life, then you're going to just be enslaved to something. This man was chained. It also tells us that he was cutting himself. Self-destructive. It says he was cutting himself with stones. Now, I remember the first time I heard a few years ago about the problem of self-cutting, and it's more prevalent among young women than men, where they just are trying to find some sensation, and somehow cutting themselves gives them some feeling of control and life. And I frankly, I'm not an expert. I don't understand it, but I know it's not God's will for us to hurt ourselves. You can read in the Bible when the prophets of Baal, this devil god, when they wanted to please their God, they pulled out knives and lances and they cut themselves. Your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. God doesn't want you to hurt yourself. Everything about this man it's really reflecting a lost world. Jesus crossed a stormy sea and he comes to the shore and he reaches this one man. Now, the amazing thing is, and the reason this man is a hero of mine in the Bible, and you might think, Pastor Doug, why? Because he was as far from God as anyone could be, but there was something left of that man's individuality in him. He had a little piece of himself, in spite of all the devils that filled him. I want to pause right there. How do you get to the place where you got 1,000 devils? Is anyone born that way? I think that you can get where you're so good at telling the devil yes when temptation comes, you get to where you can't say no. And that man was so preoccupied with living for worldly pleasure and sensual pleasure and giving into any temptation and addiction, he basically handed over the reins of his life to a spectrum of diabolical agencies. But there was something of him left inside. And when Jesus came to the shore in that desolate place, the devil started probably talking in his head, and they said, oh no, what are we going to do? This is Jesus. He's going to set him free. And the man realized, this is my only hope. And he went to Jesus just like he was. You can't think of anybody in the Bible farther from God than that man, but he did something right. He came to Jesus as he was. You've probably, if you're a Christian, sung the song, Just As I Am, without one plea, except your blood is shed for me. That man came just as he was. He was poor and wretched and naked, covered with scars, surrounded by pigs, living among the dead. But he came to Jesus. And the Bible says Christ cast the devils out of him. The devils all went up and like a tornado, they ended up filling a herd of pigs that was up on the hill, and the pigs all went berserk. They went running off the cliff like an avalanche of pork chops, and they went bouncing down the hill and they drowned in the water below. Because Jesus cares more about people than pigs. And Jesus figured demons are unclean, pigs are unclean, put them together. You know, the other reason Christ allowed that to happen, it is an interesting story. Because Jesus was loving. There's only 2 times in the Bible something died in connection with Jesus. Everywhere he went, he healed and he raised. A fig tree died and these pigs died. But you know, when all those pigs drowned, Matthew says there were 2,000 of them. Sea of Galilee is not that big. You can see across it. 2,000 pigs floating to the surface in a Jewish lake got everybody's attention. It probably rendered the whole lake unclean for a while. It was not kosher for sure to eat fish out of that lake for a little while. And the reason you find this story in Matthew, Mark, and Luke is because everybody in Israel knew about Jesus helping this one demon-possessed man. Christ set him free. And you know, when the people of the town came, because they lost all these pigs, they came and they saw the man. It says he was sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, which is something you should probably never forget. There is a connection between being in your right mind and being clothed. But he came to Jesus and he set him free. And the people of the town were scared. Everybody in this story is scared. The disciples are scared of the storm, then they're scared when Jesus takes away the storm, then they're scared of the demoniac, then he heals the demoniac, then they're scared when he's healed. They're scared before the storm. They're scared after the storm. They're scared when he's demon-possessed. They're scared when he's normal. And they asked Jesus to leave. And Jesus said, if you want me to leave, I'll leave. That's a very important point. If you want God in your life, you need to ask him. He will not force himself on you. Jesus said, I'll stand at the door and knock. Christ has manners. Revelation chapter 3, I knock. If you open the door, I will come in and abide with you. Sometimes we ask him to leave. Jesus will not force himself on us. When they said leave, he got in the boat to leave. And the man out of whom the devils were cast, he came to Jesus and said, Lord, let me go with you. And Jesus, no, I didn't set you free to just sail around with me. I set you free to go tell others what God did for you. And he sent him out preaching. Now that's why this story is very precious to me, is because I feel like that man. And at this point, I'll do a little transition and share my personal story. Everybody wants to be happy. Most people in the world think that happiness comes from having more money or having popularity, being better looking, wanting everyone to like you. But I don't believe that's where happiness comes from. I have an unusual set of parents. That's a picture of mom and dad, obviously many years ago, black and white. They're as different as any two people could be. My mother was a Democrat. My father was a Republican. My mother was from New York City. My father was a country boy from Oklahoma. My mother was Jewish. My father was a Baptist. She was in show business. He was a businessman. They were just as different as they could be. She could sing and play the instruments. I never heard my father play anything but the radio, and I don't know that I ever heard him sing once in my life. That's probably the reason they were only married for about 6 years. Long enough for my brother and I to be born. Well, a little bit about my father. Dad was a very successful businessman. He was a pilot. And I'm a pilot. My brothers were pilots. And after World War II, Dad was a pilot in World War II. He flew in Europe, out of England, was there at D-Day, captain in the Air Force, and saw a lot of death. Began to think, if there's a God, why would he let all this suffering happen? And he kind of gave up on God. But after the war, he started to buy planes. He bought the U.S. military surplus, and he started an airline. And he started an international air leasing company. And he ended up at one point owning 2 airlines. And these are just some magazines, George Batchelor, International Air Lease, Most Influential Person of the Year. He was friends of Howard Hughes. He knew a lot of people in the aviation industry. New Miami, South Florida, George Batchelor, Miami's Mr. Aviation. At one time, he owned controlling interest in 2 airlines, leased aircraft to the military, made millions of dollars. We had all the toys. When I was living with Dad, I went back and forth between Mom and Dad and boarding schools. Dad had a yacht. He had several. This is the last one that he had. It's actually called the Bachelor Party. That's actually a picture of it. This is inside. It was really nice. I shared this testimony in Fiji with some guys that took me out and Karen out scuba diving, and it was a different boat. And I told them, can you get chairs like this in your boat next time? And Dad used to race cars. He would race these Formula One cars and tried to find happiness through money. This is actually Dad racing one time. Even as he got older, he had the toys. He had Ferraris in our house, Jaguars, Maserati, Rolls Royce. We owned all of those cars. I had a lot of money, but he wasn't happy. Every night, Dad drank himself to sleep. And just to give you an idea, this is a picture of Dad with wife number 3. There were 5 of them. Wife number 1 died in a plane crash with my dad's first son. Everybody has tragedy in their life. My mother was wife number 2. After I was born, they found out my older brother had cystic fibrosis. And so Dad never had any other children because he realized there was a great risk there. I was very fortunate that I was born healthy. When Dad divorced Betty, this is Betty here, she was Miss Kentucky. When Dad divorced Betty, because she signed a prenuptial agreement, she was only able to get $17 million. That's US, not New Zealand. Donald Trump, when his wife Ivana divorced him, she only got $14 million because she signed a prenuptial agreement. It was the largest divorce settlement in Florida history. And this is, you can't read this, I'll try and read this to you. At 71, aviation pioneer George Batchelor is not ready to descend. He runs one of Miami's most successful companies. He pilots jets, he races cars, and is soon to wed a bride aged 29, which is part of the reason he divorced wife number 3. It's because someone else got involved. Here's the Miami Herald business section. At 71, Batchelor going on 16. So Dad was pretty aggressive. Now that's the last picture that I have of myself with my father and my brother. And yeah, my brother and I, we had the same mother and father, but we didn't. He had flaming red hair. He had freckles and brown eyes, and I've got blue eyes, and I don't have freckles, I don't have hair. But we were the same, as far as I know, same mother and father. That's a picture of my brother. Actually, that may be the last picture. That's of my brother and his wife. Karen and I just saw Sandy a few weeks ago at the foundation. And my father, and that was wife number 4. Yes, Karen's checking my math right now. And I'm sure she married him for his good looks and winning disposition. But yeah, you know, she took him to Rome, and he made a donation to the Catholic Church, and he was able to meet Pope John Paul II. And if you donate $2 million, you could probably meet the Pope also. But he wasn't happy. I saw my dad all through my life. He just had to drink himself to sleep every night. He had a lot of money, and he had worries and stress. Karen's a physical therapist. She was just giving Dad a neck rub because of the stress. And I don't know why I snapped this picture. But so I saw this growing up. And a lot of our friends, they had money. You know, the Bible says, what profit is it if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? A man's life does not consist in the abundance of things that he possesses. Jesus said, do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth where thieves break through and steal, and moth and rust does corrupt. Well, I'd never seen rust before like Fiji. Everything rusts in Fiji, at least on part of the island. Stainless steel. That's Mom. We'll talk about her for just a minute. I'm the cute one on the left. This is my brother. My dad named Falcon and I after airplanes. I did okay. Douglas is sort of a normal name after the DC craft, Douglas McDonald. Falcon was named Falcon. It's tough having the name Falcon Batchelor. He got teased a lot, and he had flaming red hair, and he was small because of his cystic fibrosis. Growing up, even though he was 2 years older than me, I was always his size because his growth was slowed because of his disease, and he really struggled. And I got into a lot of fights in school because kids were picking on my older brother. And so I got into a lot of trouble. Now, Mom was involved in show business. She started as a songwriter, and Mom used to write songs for Elvis Presley, and I don't know if anyone remembers Andy Williams, Frank Sinatra, some of these names. She was an actress, but her acting, she was always small, kind of B-class movies. And if any of you ever saw the 10 Commandments, you saw my mother, but you didn't know it because it was so quick. She was in the movie. We tell the kids, there's Grandma, there she goes. That was it. But she hung around Hollywood, and she knew some of the people. But most of the time, Mom really was successful. She did plays on Broadway in New York, and she was a songwriter. She's very talented. But most of her success was as a film critic. She was the president of the Los Angeles Film Critics. She lived in Beverly Hills, and she was on ABC Good Morning America, and had her own syndicated program called Ruth Batchelor's Hollywood. And so the people in the show business really were afraid of Mom, because when you're a film critic, if a movie comes out and you say, oh, the movie's terrible, the production houses lose millions of dollars. And if you say, oh, the movie was great, they get a lot more in ticket sales. And so it's a very powerful position, and there's a lot of corruption. The stars all try to bribe the critics to say something nice, and the producers, and and the movie companies. But Mom knew a lot of people in Hollywood, and they were friends, and a lot of artists growing up we would see. I didn't know Muhammad Ali. This is Mom with Cassius Clay, and some of you can recognize Mom. She with I guess he's Sir Paul McCartney now, and Sylvester Stallone, a young one. This is Mom with Natalie Wood. Someone said they look alike, a little bit. One of the older James Bonds, Roger Moore, and I got lots of pictures like this I could show, but it actually gets tedious after a while. Here's Mom with Sally Field, and Mom with Clint Eastwood. Paul Newman, he was a pretty nice guy. But as I saw growing up, a lot of these people, they're famous, everyone knows who they are, they're talented, they weren't very happy. And a lot of them were on drugs and had very serious personal problems, or they were extremely vain, where you wouldn't even want to talk to them, because all they want to do is talk about themselves. It's like the story of the actress at a Hollywood party, and she's chatting away to a friend, and she's going on and on talking about herself. And finally she realizes, and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. We've been doing nothing but talking about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think of me?" That's sort of how it is, It's just such it's an industry where it's all about me, and when you just spend all your time thinking about yourself, you self-destruct. You kind of cut yourself with stones. I remember I had a friend growing up. He was an actor. He was a child actor in his teens. Good looking. I don't know that I ever met anyone more talented. He could sing, he could dance, he could play instruments, act, very creative. And he locked himself in a garage in upstate New York, turned on the car, and committed suicide. Good looking, healthy, had money, miserable. And I just saw a lot of misery in this life. And I thought, money doesn't bring happiness. This is Mom with Dustin Hoffman. Does he look happy? And when Mom died, even though all those people were afraid of her and they all knew her, Karen and I were there at the hospital with my grandmother and my aunt. Nobody else was there. Nobody sent cards. Nobody sent flowers. And she pretty much died in obscurity and alone. And, if you're going to be important to someone, be famous to God in heaven. It doesn't matter what the world thinks of you, because they can't reward you. God can. And yet some people, young people, they think, "Oh, what do you want to be?" "I want to be a star. I want to be famous." Why? Do you think those people are really happy? That's not where happiness comes from. This is, I think, a picture of Mom with there was a movie years ago about a dog named Benji. This is the dog. I grew up in New York City mostly. I was born in California. I don't know if you ever heard of Burbank, California. It's where the studios are. Dad had an airport there, and that's where Mom and he met. And so I was born there, but when they divorced, Dad went to Florida, Mom went to New York City, and my brother and I sort of bounced around between New York City and Florida and Miami. Because my father was so driven to make money and he was so busy traveling, and my mother was so busy with her work, they often put us in boarding schools or summer camp. And just about every summer, my brother and I got sent off to camp, and eventually Falcon couldn't go because of his health. But they sent me to military school when I was 5 years old. I went to 2 military schools. The first military school, 5 years old, that's absolutely true. I was the youngest cadet at Black Fox Military Academy. This is a picture when I went to New York Military Academy. This is where Donald Trump went to military school. Matter of fact, he was a senior. I just want you to know he's older than me. He was a senior about the time I was in, whatever it was, 11 years old there. But that's only 2 of 14 schools I went to. Because between Maine and New York Military Academy and Florida and California, I went to 14 different schools. I went to 2 Catholic schools, military schools, 2 Jewish schools. Now talk about it, that will confuse a kid. Go to 2 Jewish schools and then 2 Catholic schools. And when I was in military school, they said every Sunday you've got to go to services. And they said, "Batchelor, where are you going?" I said, "I don't know. If I go to the Jewish services, my dad gets mad. If I go to the Catholic services, my mom gets mad." So I used to rotate every Sunday between the services. So I was real mixed up. But most of the schools I went to taught there was no God. I went to a lot of public schools. I got into trouble, got kicked out of school several times. I got put back one year. And I wasn't very happy because most of the schools I went to basically taught evolution, that you and I have just evolved over billions of years, and life is a big biological accident. Everything is a coincidence, and there's really no purpose. It's just a biological anomaly that we exist, and we are aware of our existence. And that when you die, you turn into fertilizer, and that was it. Hope you had a good time. And I thought, if people are unhappy most of the time, and if you die and you just turn back into fertilizer, why not get it over with? And so I started thinking about suicide when I was still just a teenager. Well, actually, I started probably about 7 years old. When I was in New York City with Mom, I'd find my way to the roof of these tall apartment buildings, and I would literally go and I'd put my feet on the edge, and I used to kind of look over the edge, and I'd play this game where I'd see how far out I could go before I start feeling my center of gravity, 20 stories up. And I was just flirting with death all the time because I really wasn't happy. The reason I didn't just jump is because I thought, what if I hit a car or a tree or something and I just get all crippled and mangled, and then I'm worse off than before? I was afraid, what if I don't succeed? Because I read somewhere that a lot of suicide attempts fail. By the way, more women attempt suicide than men, but men are more successful than women. I don't know if that's anything to brag about, but I didn't want to fail. I remember one time I was in a lot of trouble. I was alone. Mom was out for the evening. I was in trouble at school. I was very unhappy. And I felt like no other kids liked me. And that's very important when you're a teenager. And I went into Mom's bedroom. I just wanted to go to sleep and never wake up. And I knew Mom took sleeping pills every day because she would mention it every night. And I went to her medicine cabinet and I found a bottle and it said Valium, take one at bedtime. I thought, that's it. I want to go to sleep and never wake up. And I made up my mind I'm going to do it. And I filled my hand with the pills, and I got some water, and I kept looking at the pills. And the reason I hesitated was I looked at the bottle. I was 13 years old, and I thought, Valium. It doesn't say sleeping pills anywhere on the bottle. It says Valium, take one at bedtime. I said, how do I know Valium is a sleeping pill? So what if Valium might be some kind of special pills for ladies' sickness problems? And I thought, what could happen to me if I took a handful of these? I said, who knew what would happen? So I put the pills back in the bottle. And then about that time, I remember they had a commercial on TV in New York about beer. And it was for Schlitz beer. And it said, you only go around once in life, get all the gusto you can. I thought, there's a good motto for life. You just go, you're going to die, have as much fun as you can. Die doing something exciting. And so I started to live that way. I started just being as reckless as I could. I was just flirting with death all the time. I was playing with explosives and electricity, and I was stealing cars. When I was with my dad in southern Florida, this is a picture of the island my dad lived on. He was actually the north side of that island. Karen and I'd been there once, even after he sold the house. I went back 30 years later, nothing had changed. The people that bought the house, it was the weirdest thing in the world. When my dad died, I went to the house where we grew up. He sold his house to 2 accountants that never budged the furniture. He sold it furnished. The carpet was the same. The pictures on it's like a time warp. The banister I used to slide down, they had green shag carpet. I couldn't believe it. We used to rake our carpet, and they're still there 30 years later. Anyway, that was the house. It was up north. We had a boat, 3 boats in the backyard. He had a yacht, ski boat, and I had a little sailboat. And my friends around the island were all millionaires. You had to go by a security guard to get on the island. The other bridge goes to another island, but there's only one bridge onto both those islands called the Sunset Islands. You've heard of Firestone tires? I used to date Amy Firestone. You've heard of Hoover vacuum cleaners? Sandy Hoover lived on the second island. We used to play together. And, it was always strange. Sandy Hoover, his parents owned the Hoover vacuum cleaner industry. You know what his goal in life was? He wanted to be a bus driver. He was so excited about the idea of driving a bus. I'm not kidding you. He would ride his bicycle up to a bus stop, and he'd go, "Ka-ch! Everybody off." I am not kidding you. And the last time I saw Sandy, he was a limo driver. He realized money doesn't bring happiness, and he thought, I'd really like to drive. That's what makes me happy. So these are the kids that we grew up with. But we started getting into trouble because I began to break into homes and steal. And I started doing it with the other kids of the millionaires on the island. We didn't need to steal. We had money. We were spoiled. But we were bored. And so for the excitement, because we felt like life has no excitement, we were not only using drugs, we were breaking into homes, and it didn't matter what you stole. We'd say, I dare you to break into that house, Doug. The lights are still on. I dare you to break in. And we'd have a few drinks, and I'd break into a house, and I'd steal something while people were still there, and I'd come out with like a tennis racket. I didn't even play tennis. Just steal something. It didn't matter, We'd steal cars, because on the island, they'd leave their keys in their cars. And I remember I wrecked a Jaguar XKE in reverse one time. And after I wrecked it, I pulled it back into the yard and parked it. Because it was wrecked in reverse, my stepmother, it was her car. My stepmother thought that someone had pulled into our circular driveway, hit the car, and pulled out. But we used to steal other cars and just go joyriding. And it was really sad. We'd get bored and we'd say, what do you want to do? Oh, we broke into my house. Let's break into your house. No, we'd get bored and we'd all be stealing from these houses. Because there was a security guard, the police were sure the thieves were coming by boat. And so we would sit there and smoke pot and look out on the water and see the police boats circling the island trying to catch the thieves. And it was the kids of the millionaires stealing from the others. Well, when I started using drugs, it was with my mother. And I remember when I was 13 years old, that one day Mom said, well, Doug, eventually, I know you're going to do this on the street. I just assume you do it at home. And Mom rolled a marijuana cigarette and smoked it with me. And then it became a regular thing 2 or 3 times a week. I'd say, oh, come on, Mom, come on. And she'd say, okay. And we'd smoke pot together, eat ice cream, and watch TV. And when my brother would come visit, my brother had a lung disease. He couldn't smoke. And he found out, and he said, that's not fair. I can't smoke. She said, look, I'll make you some hashish brownies. And so Mom would make marijuana or hashish brownies for my brother. And one day I took some to school. I gave them to the teacher. Said, my mom's a really good cook. You're going to like these. So I learned to use drugs from my mother and father. When I was with Dad, she was a hippie. He was a redneck. Dad drank all the time. Dad he was sort of a functioning alcoholic most of his life. He had a bar in the house and had an abundance of alcohol. And my friends and I would come over during the day. We'd drink, and then the butler would replace it because he thought my father was entertaining or something. And then my dad never knew it was missing. So I started drinking a lot. And it began when I was very young. I'd go empty his martini glasses. And I developed a taste for it when I was young. And then as I got older, it was a lot more and harder drinks. And I'm not going to belabor the story, but I've been in and out of jail several times, probably 7 different times. I've been shot at, chased by the police, and in reform school. My parents were beside themselves what to do with me. And obviously, I was just trying to find a purpose to life. I was all mixed up. I ran away the first time when I was 13 years old and ran off into the mountains. I hated the city. I always wanted to be in nature, which is why I'm excited about being here in New Zealand. And last time I ran away, I was 15 years old, and I moved to Boston. I went hitchhiking from Miami up to Boston. I was kind of breaking into homes and stealing. I was stealing cars and televisions, and I had a part-time job as a security guard. Sure, believe it or not, when I was 16 years old, I lied on my driver's license. I had a learner's permit. You know, when you're 16, you can get a learner's permit in the U.S. My birthday is 1957, if you want to. I took the 7 and I carefully turned it into a 2. And I got a counterfeit ID that said I was much older than I was. And so here I had a weapon. I'm walking around Boston. I'm a security guard. I'm guarding places at night, and I'm stealing during the day. Because if you walk out of a house at night with a TV, you look suspicious. But if you do it in the day in a city, they just think you're moving. But then my friend, who was also a security guard, a friend named Jerry, he found out about what I was doing. And I said, oh man, are you going to tell on me? He said, no, Doug, I don't need to tell on you. He said, your karma is going to get you. I said, karma? He said, whatever you do comes back. He was very religious. So what do you mean? He says, it's a law of life. You get what you give. I'm not going to tell. He said, God's going to catch up with you. I said, there's no God. He said, you'll see. And I started to watch. And I woke up in my apartment one morning, not long after he talked to me. And I remember I told him, I said, Jerry, I sold that television set. I got rid of it. Nothing happened to me. Nothing's going to happen. He said, you'll see. I woke up in my apartment a few days later. The door was open when I woke up. And I looked and my TV was gone. And my radio. And you'd be surprised. I called the police right away to report it. I was very upset. I was absolutely indignant that there wasn't better crime control in that city. And I started watching, and I noticed that everything I did seemed to backfire. I'd steal something, and my friends were all thieves. They'd steal it from me. There's no honor among thieves. Or I would, like break into a house and steal something while I was drinking or high, and I'd hide it. And I'd wake up and go, where did I put it? And I really couldn't remember. I know there's some money hidden in a wall in Maine right now, and I never did find it. Or I'd steal something, and I'd risk my life to steal a stereo or something. I'd get back, and I'd plug it in, I'd find out it's broken. I just about got killed in Boston actually Brooklyn, stealing a broken stereo. And I started thinking, crime doesn't pay. And what convinced me was a little thing. I went to someone's house, and I went in their kitchen, and I was invited to their house, but while they were doing something else, I went in the kitchen, I saw they had in their cupboards a brand new box of Krusty's Instant Pancake Mix. I don't know if you know about Krusty's, but it's instant pancake mix, and it was the whole wheat pancake mix. And even though I'm drinking and using drugs and all these things, I was very health conscious, and I just wanted whole wheat pancake mix. And so I stole the pancake mix and put it in my car. And on the top of the box, it was stamped $1.19. That's before the barcode. Had a blue stamp. That very same day, while I was gone, some friends came through my house uninvited. I had a brand new jar of this powdered orange juice called Tang. You ever heard of that? Tang, yeah. They drank the whole thing. It was a brand new jar. Right there by the empty jar was the lid, and it was stamped with the same blue stamp, $1.19. And I looked at the pancake mix, $1.19. I thought, crime doesn't pay. Whatever you do comes back. Jesus teaches that. He says, with what measure you meet, it'll be measured to you. Do unto others as you want them to do unto you. And it's sort of a law of life. So I started thinking, wow, maybe there's a God. And that really shook my world. I thought, maybe there's a heaven. And maybe there's the other place. And I knew where I was trending. And I thought, I'm not interested in Christianity. Christians are all hypocrites. So I began to look for God. I looked at Christians and I said, in Ireland, the Christians are blowing up the Protestants and the Catholics, and they all say they're Christians. Jesus said, love your enemy. They're all killing each other. Christians are all hypocrites. And I'd look at the televangelists on TV begging for money. So, they're all hypocrites. Got a Rolex watch, and he's begging that you give your last penny. And so I was disgusted with Christianity. I made the mistake a lot of people make. When I wanted to find out what a Christian was, instead of looking vertically, I looked horizontally. A Christian is not a follower of Christians. A Christian is a follower of Christ. Christians will let you down. Jesus will never let you down. Don't look at what people do. Look at what Christ did. He will never let you down. There's a lot of counterfeits out there. Buried in all the broken glass of Christianity, there's a diamond. And don't let all the broken glass confuse you. So I said, Christians are hypocrites. I started looking at all the other religions. And, back then the Beatles were very big, and they were sort of into the Eastern religion. So I got into transcendental meditation, and I mixed a little bit of that in with Buddhism. And I was trying to find God through yoga. And that's where you find God, by standing on your head. And the only thing I discovered was my hair fell out when I did that. And I tried to find God through, my grandparents were Jewish. My mother was Jewish, and so they got the Kabbalah. And so I started to look into the secret arts of the Kabbalah. And I was making a big potluck out of the whole thing, mixing it all up into sort of a hash. And I'd gone to Catholic school. And so I was a little of this and a little of that. I was the most religious person you'd ever met. I believed in the teachings of Jesus a little bit, and I believed in reincarnation, and I believed in meditation, and I believed I was God. Because someone said, God is in you. You are God. And I thought, really? And it always struck me as kind of strange that if I was God, I would think I'd be smart enough to know it. Nobody would have to tell me. Hey, do you know you're God? I had no idea. Well, you're a pretty dumb God. You don't even know it. But that's what I'd been told. And so I was getting all this mixed up, but I was searching, and God knew I was searching. Well, right about that time, something interesting happened. My father flew up to see me in Boston. And he said, Doug, you need to go back to school. I'd tried everything, all these things. He says, your brother's sick. You need an education. And he said, I found a school. You're going to love this. It's 2 schools, actually, that are on a boat. They sail around the world, and there'll be girls, because military school, there were all boys back then. Now there are girls in the military school I went to, but back then it was only boys. I said, I'm not going back to military school. And he said, no, there's girls. And he said, you'll see the world. And they scuba dive, and they snorkel, and they water ski. And I liked those things. And he finally convinced me. He was pleading with me. And so he flew me from Boston to Milan, Italy. We went down to Naples and got connected with the boat. And actually, got connected to the boat with Genoa, and then we sailed in Naples. And in Genoa, I found out that Dad had sort of tricked me. He didn't tell me everything about this school. And if you want to look it up, it's called the Flint School Abroad. But the school was a place where politicians and millionaires from around the world, they take their kids to keep them out of trouble. If they were getting mixed up in drugs or some kind of cult. One time when I was looking for God, I went to a Christian mission. And they said, you come to our mission, we'll give you a free meal, but you got to listen to us preach for half an hour. So I said, all right. Well, I was on the streets back then, Santa Monica, California. I said, okay, I'll go to your mission. So they preached, and we listened, and all the drunks were there, and the drug addicts, and then they fed us a really good meal. And then a friend said, if you go to the Hare Krishna temple, they'll also feed you if you go to their service. Well, sure, that sounds a lot cooler than Christianity. So I went to the Hare Krishna temple. And there, the service was very simple. They jumped up and down. I don't want to be disrespectful. I'm just telling you what my observation was. They jumped up and down for an hour and a half, and they said, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I never forgot it because they did it for an hour and a half. And they played the drums, and they had these guys, they're wearing their saffron robes, and they shaved their heads, and the gals, and they're going, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. And everyone's, and I was watching it for a while, and I'm thinking, man, I want to eat. I came here because I want a meal. Hour goes by, and I finally said, I'm going to the restroom. I went and I just hung out in the bathroom waiting for the music to die down. And finally, when it started to fade, I went out there, and my friend from Brooklyn that was with me, he was getting into it. And I thought, this is hypnosis. And I could see how people were getting caught up in some of these things. My mom was in show business. I knew a little bit about, kind of crowd hypnosis and what was happening. And so people went to this school on the boat. These millionaires paid very expensive to put their kids there. They had a good education, but they taught atheism. It's not like they just taught evolution. They had curriculum that was especially designed to undermine any faith in religion. And now I was very religious, and I'm in my room and I'm meditating. I was into a religion then called Shakti, the spiritual science of DNA. God is in your DNA molecules. And I was meditating, and I learned something interesting. Even though the boat taught atheism, we were sailing from northern Africa across the Mediterranean to Spain. And I know it doesn't look very big on a map, but the Mediterranean Sea is much bigger than you think when you get out in the middle of it. And it takes days in a sailboat to get across. And this was wintertime, and we got into a storm, a very serious storm. You can read in the book of Acts about a storm Paul gets in. And waves were completely going over the boat. The nose of the boat would go through a wave, and part of the wave would roll from the bow to the stern. Things were washing overboard. The wind was howling like a hurricane. You could scream at a person a few feet away. They couldn't hear you. The mainsail ripped. Everybody was seasick. The captain was seasick. The sun went down. The captain said, if you fall overboard, we can't even turn around. The water's cold. You're probably not going to survive more than 5 minutes. We will mark the spot and tell your parents. But we can't risk in a storm like this putting the ship broadside to the wind. And that put the fear in us. And they had me on deck standing watch. Everyone else was in the middle cabin, seasick. And when you went below deck, it looked like someone had taken the boat and turned it upside down and shook it. The mattresses and the books and everything were in the halls. I mean, what do you think atheists do when they think they're going to die? It's amazing. It's astounding. Everybody knows exactly what to do. They know what to say. They know who to talk to. Nobody was going, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Everybody was talking to God and say, Lord, save us. And they're making promises. If you save us, they're promising. They knew what they're doing wrong. They said, if you say, I'll never do it again. But fear is the wrong reason to serve God. And as soon as the storm was over, everyone forgot their promises. If you're serving God just because you're afraid, what are you going to do when you get to heaven? You're not going to want to serve him anymore. You need to serve him because you love him, who he is. Well, when I got back, I went home for Christmas break, and I said, I'm not going back to this school. I didn't tell my dad that. I told my brother. I sold all my stuff to my brother in Miami, and I took off hitchhiking. I wanted to go back to California to some mountains I found when I was 15 years old. And I took off across the country, and this is, it's like 4,000 miles. I don't know what that is in kilometers, but it was a long way. And it's the middle of winter. Now, Miami's warm, but Oklahoma in the middle of winter gets way below freezing. And I got out on the road. I got stuck on Interstate 40 in Oklahoma for hours. I was out there begging for a ride. You do hitchhiking here in New Zealand, you know what I mean? And every time a truck went by, I nearly froze. And I stood there, and I got so desperate at times, I got on my knees and I begged. And it's an amazing amount of rejection when every time you see a car going your direction and you see they've got room in the car, it's just one person in a little backpack, and they got the heater on, and they see you, they look at you, you make eye contact, and they go by, and they're basically saying, I don't want to ride with you. And you do that for hours, and it's a lot of rejection. And I started feeling pretty low. I was too proud to call home. I was hungry. I was sick because I was drinking the day before and I was still hungover. Plus I was cold, shivering, had no money. I was playing pool the night over. I know, I was telling you how religious I was, but I was still drinking and playing pool and doing a lot of things wrong. And so in desperation, I prayed. I didn't know how to pray. I knew a Jewish prayer. It's a prayer for the bread. I thought, what am I going to do with that? And so I didn't know how to pray. Like, no one really, I knew our Father, which art. I didn't know how to pray. So I just talked to God and said, God, I know I've been terrible. And I really was. I was really rotten and selfish. I didn't care about anybody because I didn't think anyone cared about me. And I said, will you please forgive me? I thought I was going to die out there. And I said, I was ready to die before I called home for help. I said, will you please forgive me? And I asked God for 4 things. I said, please help me get a ride to where I'm going. I still had like 1,500 miles to go. I said, please help me get some food. I was hungry. Help me get some money. I was broke. And the 4th thing, I prayed for a ride with someone normal because the people who had been picking me up I got picked up by this guy drinking. And he was on a windy road. He said, I can drive without the lights on. Watch this. And he turned off the lights. It scared me half to death. You think it's dangerous to pick up hitchhikers. It's dangerous to hitchhike. They say the only people, this is what they said on the streets, the only people that will pick you up when you're hitchhiking are crazy people and Christians. And I got picked up by all the crazy people. I got picked up by some college students that were smoking so much pot that they couldn't see out the windshield. And they ran across the middle of the road into oncoming traffic. And I said, this is my stop, guys. I'm out here. So I said, Lord, give me a ride with someone normal. As soon as I finished praying, the next vehicle stopped. There was a white van. The guy picked me up. He took me nearly 2,000 miles, 1,500 miles to the door of where I was going, right to the door in California. He fed me the whole way out. I didn't ask him to. Just every time we stopped, he said, let me buy your food. Let me buy your food. He gave me $40 when he dropped me off. That's all the things I prayed for. Except he also preached to me all the way from Oklahoma to California. I didn't ask for that. And he was a born-again Christian. He thought everyone else should be. He was so excited. He was totally unashamed. He was talking to everybody on the road, the gas station, the restaurant about God. He was just in love with God. And I had to sit there and listen to him and go, yeah, that's cool. I'm going, but who can believe the Bible? I'm Noah and the ark, and they're all fairy tales, I thought. And so I thought, I'm going to find God through nature. And so when he dropped me off, I moved up into the mountains into a cave. And I was 15 years old when I first found this place, visiting my grandparents. These are the mountains above Palm Springs, California, where all the movie stars live. And way up above Palm Springs is a very tall mountain. It's 11,000 feet. I don't know how to convert that to meters. Mount San Jacinto. And way up in these desert mountains, there was a creek that went down. The mountains were very hot, but down in the creek, there were some trees that grew, and there was a cave by a waterfall. And it was a beautiful spot. This is just to give you a picture. This is from where I took the previous picture. This is looking uphill. There was snow on that mountain much of the year. And I moved into this cave. Believe it or not, my brother came up to visit me once, and he took this picture. And the cave was deeper off to the left. This is sort of the open part. Right by the cave, there was a waterfall and a creek. That's my cat, Stranger. He just showed up one day, so I called him Stranger. And he kind of took care of the kangaroo rats and the mice and the small varmints, rattlesnakes in the cave. So he was very valuable. And I would never wear any clothes when I was up there. What you saw was the G-rated picture. Once or twice a week, I'd hike into town and I'd panhandle. I'd beg for money, play the flute, beg for money. And I would dig in the garbage can behind the market. And when my grandfather found out, my grandparents lived a few miles away in Desert Hot Springs. When they found out that I was digging in the garbage can for food, and they told my father, it broke his heart. Can you imagine? Here, my father worked all his life. He was so poor during the Depression and going through the war and making all this money and trying to get his son educated, and here I am, I'm eating out of the garbage. And I just disappeared. When I ran away, I never called him. He was so busy with his work, I just thought he doesn't care about me, and I just never even called him. And it broke his heart. And I can't help but think what your heavenly Father must think when he gives his son that we might have eternal life and all the treasures of heaven, and instead we go to the garbage of the devil in the world, and it doesn't satisfy. Well, the miracle that I didn't mention is when I moved up in the cave. Oh, here's one more picture of the cave. See, I have a pole there, and I got my food up on the pole because I had these squirrels that used to get my food. I had to put it up on this slippery pole. When I first moved into the mountains, there was a Bible in the cave. And do you guys have Gideon Bibles here in New Zealand in the hotel rooms? Someone asked me one time, they said, Doug, was it a Gideon Bible? I thought that was kind of funny. They thought that the Gideons, after they do all the hotel rooms, they start putting them in caves everywhere. No, it wasn't a Gideon Bible. But it was a King James Bible. And I didn't believe the Bible. I thought it was odd. Someone else had camped there before, so it wasn't that peculiar. There were some old pots and pans. The ceiling was black from the smoke. And I thought, One of these days I'm going to have to read that. And then all these Christians would argue with me. They say, Doug, are you born again? Are you sanctified? What are they talking? You washed in the blood? What are they talking about? So I thought, I'm going to read the Bible so I can argue with Christians. Because I like to read. I'd never read anything like the Bible before. I'd read little pieces of it in Catholic school, but hadn't just picked it up and read it. And I got through Genesis okay. That was interesting. I read through the story of Moses and the Exodus, but then when they started building the sanctuary, it got a little tedious. They were measuring all the things. I said, oh, man. I went to my friend who was a Christian. He said, no, Doug, you got to jump to the New Testament. Read about Jesus. So I went to the New Testament, and I read the story of Christ. And every day I would eat banana bread because I'd go to the market and I'd get old bananas they threw away. And I made banana bread. I made good banana bread. Anyway, I won't tell you about it. And I'd eat banana bread and I'd read the Bible. And I didn't work. I'd read for hours. And I read Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And while I was reading, a real struggle was in my mind because I thought, this can't be true. Jesus never really lived. And I went and looked it up in the encyclopedia, and they all said he really lived. I thought, wow, that's amazing. I thought he was just sort of a fable from history like Hercules or something. I didn't know he really lived. And then I read about the teachings of Jesus, and I felt so stupid because I was reading all these things where Jesus said, turn the other cheek. And I went, oh, he's the one that said that. I had no idea. I heard people quote it. Or when he said, go the second mile. Or he that casts the first stone. Love your enemies. I'm going, I had no idea Jesus said all that. I felt really ignorant. And, I didn't understand everything because I was reading the King James Bible, and every time it said brethren, we don't say brethren in New York City. I thought it said breathen. Say the breathing came together. I go, that's heavy. What does that mean? A lot of breathing in the book of Acts. And so I'll admit there's some of those old words that I didn't understand. And, but I thought to myself, I only have three choices. C.S. Lewis said the same thing, it just a little differently. I thought, well, either Jesus was crazy or Jesus was a liar or he's telling the truth. You don't really have a third option or fourth option. It's just one of those three. C.S. Lewis says he's either Lord or liar or lunatic. And I said, he wasn't crazy because I've never heard such brilliance in my life as when I read about Jesus. He wasn't a liar because he could have died to save his life. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So my final option was, maybe Jesus was who he says he was. And God came to earth in the form of a man for three reasons. He came to show us what God is like. He came to show us how to live as our example. And then he came as our substitute to die in our place for our sin because the penalty for sin is death. If Jesus is not your substitute, you're on death row. And, I thought I've tried everything else. And I'm making a long story short, that the Holy Spirit kept working with me. And I thought, Lord, I finally got on my knees up in the cave. And I prayed. And I don't even remember exactly what I prayed. I don't even remember the date. It's kind of interesting. The Bible, I never did tell you this. In the front of the Bible, there was a note. And it said someone's name, I don't remember the name. And there was a date, and I don't remember that. It said, born again on such and such a date. I hope whoever finds this book finds the same peace and happiness I found. There's something written in the front of the Bible. I thought, I never thought anything of it. And I don't know exactly when it happened, but sometime that year I got on my knees and I prayed and I said, Lord, I'm a mess. Now, I was running around naked up in the mountains with long hair and a beard and eating out of garbage cans and using drugs and drinking and stealing. I was still stealing. I was very religious, but I thought, these corporations have too much and they charge too much, so it's okay to steal from them. I could rationalize anything. I was a big zero, and life had no purpose. And I said, Lord, if you'll forgive my sins, give me some peace, take away. And I'm 17 years old, but I had a lot of guilt. And I invited the Lord into my life, and everything began to change. I had tried every religion that I could think of. But when I came to Jesus and I asked him in, it was real. And miracles started to happen, amazing things. I would pray. I'd be on the street and say, Lord, could you please provide something to eat? And a lady walked up and handed us $4. I mean, just lots of miracles where just basic things where I pray for food. I went into a restaurant with no money, and I said, Lord, I have no money. Can you please provide food? And the waitress came up and said, what would you order? And I said, I have no money. She said, I'm going to buy your food today. I mean, just amazing things, right? They don't happen as much now because God expects me to have faith, but I needed signs back then. He gave them to me. At one point, I don't want to go too long here. I said, Lord, I can't live in the cave forever. I don't know. I'd like to tell others what you've done for me. And but I live in a cave, so I don't know how that's going to happen. But I just said, Lord, if you want me to tell others about you, you're going to have to show me. Would you believe within a week, I called my mother from Palm Springs. I had to call her collect. My mother said, Doug, will you be at the airport this week? I'm coming with a film crew from NBC. They heard that my son's father's a multimillionaire and he's living in a cave, and they think it's an interesting human interest story. They flew to Palm Springs from Los Angeles. They rented a helicopter. They flew with an NBC film crew up to my cave and interviewed me and asked me, so, what's going on in your life that would make you want to live up here like this? Well, I talked to him a little bit about, the cities and nature, and then I talked to him about what God was doing for me. Right after I prayed and said, Lord, if you want me to tell other people about you, you're going to have to give me a sign. And, from that day to this day, it's like Jesus said to me, I feel like that demoniac. I came to Christ just an absolute mess, but he accepted me as I was, and he gave me a purpose for living. And that means no matter who you are, no matter what your addictions, no matter what your problems are, God's got a plan for your life. Happiness does not come from fame. It does not come from fortune. I went to see my brother not long before he died. He struggled with cystic fibrosis, Falcon. And Falcon was good. He went to college even though he knew he'd never be able to work for Dad. He had a nice home in Miami Beach. He married a successful lady. She's a lawyer. Home on the water, boat, toys. I was the black sheep. I was out walking with my brother one day. He'd walk a little bit, he'd stop, he'd cough, he'd try to breathe. He's struggling to breathe. And he said, Doug, life isn't fair. He said, he used to make fun of my religion. He said, God's not fair, Doug. He said, I'm smart, but I'm sick. He said, you're healthy, but you're stupid. He said, you're throwing your life away. Brothers can talk to each other like that. And then he told me, he said, Doug, I would give everything I have if I could have your lungs and live a normal life. What he meant was, if I could just live 70 years, he died at 35. If I could live a normal life, I'd give everything I own for a little more of this life. And it kind of made me ashamed sometimes that I think I'm unwilling to sacrifice anything for Jesus and everlasting life. My brother said, he said, I know I'm terminal. He said, I feel better, Doug, because I know you're terminal too. You're gonna die. He says, we're all terminal. Only way to get out of this world alive is if you live until Jesus' coming, or you get a glorified body because he resurrects you. But we all have just a little bit of time. And the purpose for this life is that you might know God and his love and share God and his love. It's all about a love relationship with God and sharing it with your neighbor. Now, I don't know exactly what brought you here tonight. I don't know if you saw the ads on First Light. I don't know if a friend invited you. Some of you might have walked in to take pictures of the cardboard cathedral, and you said, what's going on here? And you're here. Whatever brought you here, I believe it's a divine appointment, because the Holy Spirit is saying, I've got a plan for your life.